Today is November 20th, 2025, and welcome to the New Possibilities Hour, part of the Will Work for Food project founded by Natalie Armstrong Motan. Every Thursday morning, Jean Lawler, David Schraga, Michael Schwimmer, and I are delighted to host another cutting-edge webinar for mediators, arbitrators, lawyers, and everybody who negotiates. As you likely know, there's no charge for these great webinars. Rather, we ask you to contribute to a food bank if you like what you see. And since we began the program in 2020, our audiences have been so generous in contributing in honor of our great speakers. One of my favorite parts of the webinar every week is when we announce the running total of just how much people have contributed. David Schraga, would you please do the honors?
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning. It's my pleasure. As of this past week, we've been told about donations totaling $896,211.74. Really just such an outstanding testament to the generosity of our audience and our speakers. And as everyone knows, this time of year with the holidays, it's particularly meaningful to be supportive of folks who are in need. So thank you, everyone, for participating and for supporting the organization.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you so much to everyone who's contributed and our great speakers over the last several years who've given such great presentations. This week, let's make Ellen Waldman the answer to that all-time trivia question: who is the speaker who put the Will Work for Food project above $900,000? Let's give Ellen that place in pub trivia for the rest of her life. I know it'll make her day.
I would love that.
Yeah. Now, Ellen, let's get down to our presentation, our conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. Many people on the line know you. For those who don't, Professor Ellen Waldman is the dispute prevention specialist and previously vice president of advocacy and educational outreach at the Institute for Conflict Prevention and Resolution, CPR, responsible for initiatives involving dispute prevention, diversity in the professional neutral field, mediation, and education. Conflict resolution expert with both practical and academic experience. She has decades in the classroom as full-time tenured law professor, founder and director of successful court-based mediation clinics, and also administrative and thought leadership functions, including mediation program director and bioethics consultant to major hospital ethics committees. Ellen is an experienced trainer in dispute resolution and bioethics topics. She's presented worldwide, authored over 100 articles, including the first book-length treatment of mediation ethics. So she's just an ideal person to have in this conversation about ABA Ethics Opinion 518 regarding the conduct of attorneys functioning as mediators. Professor Ellen Waldman, you go first, then I'll make some comments. Please tell us a word or two about the food bank to which you would like people to contribute if they're in a position to do so, and then on with the presentation.
Thank you so much, Jeff. So the food bank that I chose is called Feeding Westchester, and I see friends and colleagues on the line, some of whom are from New York. You know Westchester to be kind of a lovely county north of Manhattan. It's generally thought of as a pretty affluent place, but I can tell you, even in my own hometown of Croton-on-Hudson, there are many families who have been struggling, and our food pantries are well trafficked in these times. So I think this is such a great program. Kudos to Jeff and Natalie and David and everybody involved, and I appreciate everybody's generosity.
Thank you.
All right, so on to our opinion. I really hope that this can be more of a conversation than just my thoughts on the matter. But let me just get us started with just a description of what the opinion says, and then a few of my reactions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to also editorialize a little bit. So what is this opinion about? From my read, the drafters wanted to clarify two duties of lawyer mediators, which to my mind were already explained in existing codes, including the Model Standards of Conduct, but that the ABA Legal Ethics Committee obviously thought these duties were not delineated clearly enough. So first, the first duty is one of explaining and clarifying roles. The opinion says it's really important for the lawyer mediator to explain how the mediator role differs from a representational role. It's important to clarify for all parties, but most especially for parties who are unrepresented, and additionally parties who are new to the mediation process, what exactly the lawyer mediator's role is. As the opinion makes clear, this duty is already enunciated in comment 3 to rule 2.4 of the model rules, but opinion 518 explores in more detail what it means to clarify the difference between the mediator role versus a representational role. And it suggests that it's probably just not enough to say at the beginning of your mediation, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not functioning as a lawyer for you in this process, right? For unrepresented parties, for parties who are new to the process, you have to say more. You have to explain more. You have to discuss what those differences are between functioning as a neutral mediator and functioning as a lawyer in a representational capacity. So the opinion says, for example, you should explain that there is no attorney-client privilege, that when you tell parties this is a confidential process, that confidentiality does not emanate from an attorney-client relationship. It's a protection for the process, not for the lawyer-client relationship. So that is a nuanced point, and the opinion suggests you should make that clear. You have to explain to the parties, not just we don't enjoy an attorney-client relationship, I can't give you legal advice. It should also be noted that the duty to distinguish between acting as a mediator and acting in another capacity is specified in subsection A5 of the model standards under the omnibus quality of the process section, which declares that, quote, the role of a mediator differs substantially from other professional roles. Mixing the role of a mediator and the role of another profession is problematic, and thus a mediator should distinguish between the roles. So again, I see opinion 518 as sort of elaborating on that pre-existing duty of distinguishing between the roles of a neutral mediator and the roles of a lawyer functioning in other contexts. Okay. The opinion goes on in later sections to explore what exactly are the ramifications of staying in your lane as a mediator and making sure that the disputants understand exactly what that lane includes and does not include. So in section 2, the opinion says as a mediator, you have to make sure the disputants understand you are not acting in their individual best interest. So the opinion says lawyers under the model rules are obligated to act in their client's best interests. Mediators aren't. Not only are they not obligated to so act, they can't. They're prohibited from acting in one party's best interests because that, by definition, means they are acting to the detriment of the other party's best interests, and that would mean they're not neutral. the opinion, and I want to quote from it here because it's language that's important and language that I frankly have a little bit of trouble with, and I'll explain why. The opinion says a lawyer must act in the client's best interest. That's not the role of the lawyer mediator. Quote, the lawyer mediator's role is to assist the parties in resolving their dispute, regardless of where the interest of a party may lie. I confess I read that and the hair on the back of my neck went up a little bit. So I'm super curious what people on the line think. I've been thinking about, so why did that stick in my cross so much? And I think it's because in my vision of the process, I think the mediator's not just trying to help the parties get to yes, get to closure, get to resolution, but the mediator's trying to help the parties, both of them, as a collective, reach an agreement that for both of them is better than the alternatives they face. So that language of we're just trying to get to yes, whether it's a good yes for you or not, is, I think, sort of infelicitous language. Maybe it's not so surprising that this language written by legal ethicists adopts a kind of binary, dichotomous, competitive view of the process, where if the agreement's in the best interest of one disputant, it must be contrary to the best interest of the other. But in my mind, it would be appropriate for a mediator to say, my job is to help both of you reach an agreement that's better for both of you in a whole host of ways, financially, emotionally, reputationally, spiritually, than the other alternatives available to you. Having said that, I wholeheartedly agree. It is absolutely the role of the attorney, not the mediator, to say, I recommend you take this offer because it's in your best interests. That's the attorney's job. That's not the mediator's job. And where the parties are unrepresented, it's the mediator's role to counsel an unrepresented party to seek the advice and guidance of an attorney when considering whether to take an offer in mediation. We can talk a little bit about the scenario when parties are unrepresented and you tell them, you know, you really should consult with a lawyer here, and they say, yeah, not in my budget. I'm already paying for you. So that's, I mean, that is an abiding challenge for the process and for ethics in the process. Jeff, I don't think that's your population. I don't think that's the population of the work of many people on the line, but I can tell you as someone who's worked in court-connected programs, there's a lot of unrepresented disputants, and you know, the mediator has an obligation to them. We can come back to that point. Getting back to the text of the opinion, it traces the familiar terrain separating legal information from legal advice. It says, do not communicate in a way that suggests you're offering legal advice. Feel free to provide legal information or discuss the parties' respective views on how a tribunal would resolve a legal or factual question. You can even offer an opinion as to how a tribunal might rule on an issue, but do not follow up that opinion with a statement to the parties telling them that because of your view of how a tribunal would rule, they should take or not take the offer that is on the table. And again, if a party asks for legal advice, the opinion says, go tell them they should hire, you know, their counsel of choice. Okay, so that's sort of the first part of the opinion. I want to go to the second part of the opinion, which I suspect is going to be the more controversial part, and I think it's a piece that has some folks a little riled up. So we can talk about that. What are the lawyer mediator's obligations regarding truthfulness? So Rule 8C, as everyone knows, prohibits a lawyer from engaging in conduct involving dishonesty, fraud, deceit, misrepresentation. And Rule 4.1 forbids lawyers, while representing a client, from making a false statement of material fact, right? That's very much in line with Rule 8C. But then it includes the infamous comment 2, which gives lawyers a hall pass to puff, exaggerate, or mislead about their bottom line, what they're willing to settle for, how they value the case, right? Statements regarding negotiating goals or willingness to compromise are ordinarily not considered statements of material fact. So, our new opinion says lawyers in a representational capacity have this leeway to puff. Lawyer mediators do not have the same leeway, right? Rule 4.1 comment 2 does not apply. And the reasoning is parties expect lawyers in their representational capacity to puff. It is a negotiation convention, right? We really are not expecting the other side to be scrupulously truthful about what they're willing to settle for and how much they value their case. But now I'm quoting from the opinion. It's different for lawyer mediators. Quote, but parties to a mediation, having been advised about the lawyer mediator's neutral role, would have no similar reason to be on their guard when receiving communications from that individual. So the opinion says, do not carry a lawyer's inflated, exaggerated, potentially untrue statement about what is their best and final offer if you suspect that that is in fact not their best and final offer. And the opinion says, again, I'm quoting, be thoughtful and cautious. Be thoughtful and cautious when communicating info from one caucus room to another. Don't go into a room and say the other side's offering $500,000. That's their last and best offer. And then give your credence as the mediator to the information that's their last and best offer. Also, don't repeat misleading statements about the merits of the case if you know them to be exaggerated and misleading. So Jeff and I have talked a bit about this, and I will say there are some mediators who feel, Jeff, in creating just terrific advertising copy for this session, said, have we entered the golden age of mediation? And we should hear from Jeff why he thinks maybe we have. There are definitely mediators who feel like this opinion has tied one hand behind their back. So we should definitely talk about that. Jeff?
Ellen, thank you so much for introducing the topic and giving such a thoughtful and provocative view of it. Opinion 518 is a serious opinion, and it does some serious things, and it deserves some serious thought. I've given it the most serious thought of which I'm capable over the last month or so, and I want to share some of those views. The opinion does things that I don't think should be considered, many of them not controversial at all. For example, you cannot make misleading statements about the strength or weakness of a party's case. Well, misleading people ought not to be a legitimate tool in a mediator's toolbox. You cannot falsely state that this is the best offer the opposing party will make. And indeed, I don't think you can ever really say this is the best offer that an opposing party will make, because for all you know, that opposing party is trying to spin you and manipulate you. So some of these things just seem to be a lot of common sense. Where we really need to dig into it, I think, is the idea that a mediator should not say that a proposed settlement is in a party's best interest, that really encroaches on the role of the lawyer. And I have some thoughts that I've organized as best I can on that, and let me go through them. I want to start with an honest observation about why the ABA would issue Opinion 518 in the first place. Because it takes a lot of work to do something like this. And I don't think that the ABA would devote the effort to creating an opinion like this unless there were a need, unless there was a problem to be solved, unless that the ethics experts in the American Bar Association thought that something in our field has drifted badly off course. And in my opinion, there are some things in our field that have drifted badly off course. Let me come right out and say it. For years, the mediation field has been flooded, and I use that word deliberately, with retired judges and aged-out partners who enter mediation without ever mastering it as a discipline. Some people come out of other careers and do master it as a discipline. Many, however, do not. Very few become true students of the game. And it's true, once in a blue moon, somebody unschooled does become a genuinely excellent mediator. But that's about as common as Athena springing fully formed from the brow of Zeus. And many users of mediation assume that if someone is on the panel of one of the big ADR companies, quality is assured. That assumption is misplaced. Mediators insist fiercely on being independent contractors, not employees of these big ADR companies. Because of that, the ADR providers cannot control, supervise, or direct the means and methods their panel mediators use. Indeed, they are prohibited from doing so because of the insistence on maintaining independent contractor status. So many new entrants into our field are not well trained, and they're not quality controlled. They can't be quality controlled. So it falls on the ABA. The burden falls on us, the legal profession, to set some real standards. And in my view, that sets the backdrop for Opinion 518. And what 518 does at its core is strip away the habits into which mediators fall when they have not mastered the craft. It tells us clearly, you may not mislead. You may not imply facts you do not know. You may not predict outcomes you cannot know. And the heart of the opinion, you may not tell a party that a proposed settlement is in its best interest. To me, that single prohibition in Section 2, Paragraph 3 is the engine of the entire opinion. It also is the line that has the mediation world asking the right question. Does this prohibit mediators' proposals? I want to delve into that. Before we get into detail, I want to say something that ought to be obvious. We are required to be neutral. Neutrality is not optional. In my view, what is neutrality? Neutrality is not a matter of attitude or intention or absence of bias. We cannot define neutrality as an absence of bias because we all have bias. And modern psychology teaches us that much of that is unconscious bias. It is implicit bias. It very well may be biases of which we are completely unaware. In my view, a neutral process, a process with integrity, is one which protects the parties from having our biases, whatever they are, steer the outcome It's a process that provides them the opportunity to negotiate the best deal they can. So for me, the ideas of neutrality and self-determination, our other paramount value, are intertwined. Neutrality exists to protect party self-determination. So viewed through this lens, let's start with a proposition that I don't think is controversial. A mediator cannot issue a mediator's proposal that the mediator believes is better for one side than the other. If we think a mediator's proposal favors one party, we cannot call it neutral. A neutral mediator's proposal, quality mediator's proposal, must be equally good for both sides. So the question becomes, can any mediator's proposal satisfy this standard of neutrality? Let's examine that. As I see it, the only mediator's proposal that is theoretically neutral is the midpoint between the last offer and the last demand. That midpoint seems to show equal respect for where each side believes the case should settle. But in fact, reliance on these midpoints can be corrupting. The moment parties suspect that the midpoint may become the mediator's proposal, the entire mediation may become a slow motion attempt to tilt the midpoint in their favor. It could incentivize stinginess, distort movement, and poison genuine negotiation. Now, in a mediation, you may end up with the parties frozen in their positions relatively far apart from each other. Should a mediator hurl a Hail Mary mediator's proposal at the midpoint? I say no. I say you have been gamed, and you're simply inviting people to game you in the future. A mediator who gets a reputation as Mr. Midpoint has destroyed the integrity of this process. So what's left? Well, the non-midpoint mediator's proposal that the mediator selects on his own, pulls from his ear. But here's the unavoidable truth as I see it. The moment a mediator chooses a non-midpoint number, neutrality is gone. A non-midpoint proposal necessarily lands closer to one side's valuation than the other. And the disadvantaged party sees that lack of neutrality instantly. He picked their number. He bought their story. He's not neutral. And there's an additional problem, additional ethical problem we need to weave in. One that 518 does not emphasize, but the model standards do. Under the ABA, AAA, ACR model standards of conduct, Standard 1B says that a mediator shall not undermine party self-determination for reasons such as higher settlement rates, egos, or increased fees. And Ellen, I think that's what causes you to view some of that language as infelicitous, some of the language in the opinion. Because while the opinion says that we're supposed to help people get settlements regardless of their interests, I think that Standard 1B is contrary to that. And I agree with Standard 1B. We should not undermine party self-determination for reasons such as higher settlement rates, egos, or increased fees. But yet, an unvetted, pulled from the ear, non-midpoint mediator's proposal does exactly that. It is the mediator, not the parties, deciding where the case should settle. And when a mediator drops a number that is less favorable to one side because it seems that side is more malleable, more flexible, more persuadable, more eager to get out of there, that is precisely the conduct Standard 1B calls unethical. It undermines self-determination for the mediator's convenience or ego. And turning back to 518's central prohibition, we must also ask the most critical question. Does a pulled from the ear, non-midpoint proposal inevitably carry the implication that the mediator believes this number is in a party's best interest? Let's look at that more deeply. To be neutral, the mediator must believe the mediator's proposal is equally good for both sides. That inevitably requires the mediator to evaluate whether the mediator's proposal is good for each side in the first place. Well, what does that mean? Good for each side. If the mediator believes that the mediator's proposal is the best a party can do, best deal a party can get, and that it's better than the alternative of trial, in other words, that it's good rather than bad for the party, I think that is the very definition of a best interest evaluation. The best deal a party can get and better than the alternative of trial. And 518 now forbids just that. Consider it from the parties' perspectives. Parties are entitled to expect that a mediator's proposal is not better for the other side than it is for them. That's the essence of neutrality. And parties are entitled to expect that their self-determination will not be overridden for an illegitimate reason, like settlement for settlement's sake, padding the mediator's statistics, or gratifying a mediator's ego. When people choose to work with us, they are entitled to a process in which they have the opportunity to negotiate the best deal they can, not one in which we will harm them or disadvantage them in any way. That would just be lousy mediation. So some will ask, does this mean that mediators' proposals are dead? No, not at all. I think it means the unvetted mediator's proposal is dead. But the vetted mediator's proposal, one grounded in party self-determination rather than mediator omnipotence, is very much alive. Here's how it works and how I generally do it, and have for years. When the moment feels right, the mediator may ask whether the parties want to consider a mediator's proposal, or one of the parties may ask. Generally speaking, that is when the parties have traversed most of the distance between their original starting points, their best cases, and the gap is relatively narrow. People are in the same ballpark, and the aroma of settlement is in the air. If both sides are interested, the mediator does not pull anything from his ear. Instead, the mediator works with the lawyers to shape a proposal that they, the lawyers, would recommend to their own clients. The mediator's proposal itself becomes a subject of neutral facilitated negotiation and party self-determination. You want a mediator's proposal? Okay, let's talk about what that proposal should be. I want to make sure both lawyers are willing to recommend the proposal to their clients before I issue it. There's no sense in making a mediator's proposal that's going to be rejected, because we all know that once it's rejected, it can be very difficult and often impossible to get the negotiation back on track, because to the party who said yes, the mediator's proposal certainly becomes a best interest evaluation in hindsight. It's very difficult to get a party who said yes to a mediator's proposal to move up or down from that now canonized number in their mind. Now, here's a little asterisk on suggesting a midpoint. When the parties are close, and there's been several hours of what seems to be good faith bargaining, I think it may be okay to say to the lawyers, look, we've been frozen, defense, you've been offering 55, plaintiff, you've been offering 65 for 2 hours now. It seems pretty obvious the case is not going to settle for 55, and it's not going to settle for 65 either. 60 kind of suggests itself as an obvious place to go. What do you think? Sometimes I'll raise something like that in separate conversations with the lawyers, sometimes together. To me, it feels like I'm the referee in a hockey game, dropping the puck at center ice and seeing who takes a slap at it. Sometimes people say okay, sometimes they push back. Sometimes we end up with a mediator's proposal at that midpoint, sometimes at a different number when there's pushback. Sometimes no mediator's proposal at all. It lands where it lands. And that is the key. The lawyers, not the mediator, determine whether the proposal is in their client's best interest before it is made. And when the lawyers are prepared to recommend a proposal, the likelihood of getting 2 yes answers is about 99 and 77/100%. In that kind of vetted, negotiated mediator's proposal, the mediator has not evaluated anything. The mediator has not really chosen the number. The mediator has not implied whether the proposal is in anybody's best interest. The mediator has preserved neutrality and maximized and honored self-determination. So to conclude, 518 does not kill mediators' proposals. It does kill the conceit that we should conjure numbers out of thin air that we think are best for the parties. And it begins to kill the kind of mediation practiced by many practitioners who rely on the status they earned in their last job rather than the skill that comes only from training and experience as a mediator. And that is why I believe that Section 5, Opinion 518, really is going to issue in an era, a golden era for mediation, when mediator skill, mediator training, mediator experience are the most valued things of all. 518 will bring mediation back to what it is supposed to be, a disciplined process in which the parties, guided by their own counsel, in a conversation facilitated by the mediator, discover and invent the outcome for themselves. Those are my views. Hopefully this will
So,
provoke some questions.
yeah, we have
Ellen, go ahead.
lots of practicing mediators on the line. There's some interesting comments in the chat. I'm just going to repeat what I told Jeff in an earlier prep call, which is I love his suggested process for collaboratively produced mediators proposals. I love his vetted proposals. I think Jeff's ideas on I mean, I disagree with some of them, but I think his ideas on how proposals are optimally generated is terrific. I don't think it's required by or even addressed by Opinion 518, which is not to say we shouldn't talk about it, but I don't believe the opinion is really implicating the art and science of mediator proposals. So that's my view. Having said that, I do think the more lawyers can be involved, the better. David Hoffman said, if we define a mediator's proposal as a prediction of where a ZOPA exists, I don't believe that a non-midpoint proposal is partial. I agree with David. I am working with a different definition of what neutrality is and requires. I think oftentimes mediators tell the parties, when I'm coming up with a range or a number, you should just read into that range or number. That's my assessment of where we can find agreement. This is not my assessment of what is fair or equitable or represents what a tribunal would do or any of those substantive judgments, or that it's in your best interest. This is just where I think there's some overlap. So that's my view.
So, Ellen, if there's a zone of possible agreement, and it's not just one number, but there's some range where possible agreement could exist, the question is, as it often is in legal discussions and legal ethics discussions, who decides? So if you're in a zone of possible agreement, in that rare case, my judgment, it's a rare case where there's an overlap in the people's numbers. Question is, why is it the mediator who gets to decide via a mediator's proposal where in that zone of possible agreement it should go? Theoretically, you could push it all the way to one end of the spectrum or all the way to the other end of the spectrum, still be in the zone of possible agreement, And yet clearly you would be disadvantaging one party or the other by having the number be closer to their end than yours. So substituting your judgment for theirs, I think, does not maximize and honor our ethical value of self-determination. And to say that it's not your biases determining that, well, I think that all of us, myself included, occasionally need a little dose of humility here. As the saying goes, as mediator, do you really want to be the sage on the stage, or is it better to be the guide on the side? And if you think that you should be the sage on the stage deciding where to, where to chop this thing up in that zone of possible agreement, I think that the better approach is to push it back on the parties and their lawyers in the kinds of cases where I'm involved. If you have any, honestly, I think if you have much mediation skill at all, they're going to settle. And they're going to settle at the point where their own negotiation skills lead them. And it may be true that one side is a better negotiator than the other. The one side may be better at bluffing than the other. That's life. That's baseball. That's just how it comes out. But it's not the mediator putting their thumb on the scale or sacrificing self-determination on the altar of statistics, ego gratification, settlement for settlement's sake, that sort of thing. And I think it's a higher quality resolution.
Jeff, let me ask you, we both know that sometimes attorneys come into mediation and they have a client control problem. And they are really just looking for the mediator to, one, deliver the bad news that the client's case is perhaps not as airtight and undeniable as the client believes, and two, that the number at which the case can settle is not as advantageous as the client believes. So this is just maybe one or both attorneys looking to the mediator for help in getting to a reasonable outcome. And the mediator's proposal is one vehicle to do that. So are you suggesting that that's a improper use of the process?
I'm not suggesting that it's taboo to use mediators' proposals. I think we just discussed the way to do them ethically and perhaps a little more artfully. And I don't think that there's anything dishonorable about lawyers coming to mediators and saying, look, there's a reasonable deal out there. My client is inflamed by emotions and bloodlust and revenge and jealousy or whatever hot emotions there are. And please help me I think I'm giving my client good advice. The lawyer will say, if you don't think I'm giving good advice, let's talk about it. But please help me get this advice through to my client. Well, back in the 1990s, Ellen, when you and I when we used rotary dial phones and dinosaurs roamed the earth and you and I started in this field, there was a school of thought that old Judge Huff and Puff would come in and shut the door and veins would bulge in his forehead and he'd start shaking his finger. Your case is full of expletive and you'll be lucky to get a plugged nickel from a jury. And I've tried 100 cases like this and yada, yada, yada. Well, generally speaking, that didn't work. Uh, mediator would leave the room. Old Judge Huff and Puff would leave, and a lawyer would turn to his client. And I was actually in an experience like this when I was a young partner. The senior partner turned to our client, who was white as a sheet, and said, "Ah, he says that to everybody." And his credibility, that mediator's credibility, was shot. So I think that there are more artistic ways to get that through without being so ham-handed about it. Trying to encourage more people to have joint sessions. Not the kind of plenary sessions we had in the 1990s. What do you think? What do you think? Because those led to conflagrations and ultimately to the kind of caucus-only mediation that's so commonplace. I think it's possible to read the briefs, talk to the lawyers, and figure out a more tailored agenda for a joint session. What is really keeping the parties apart here? What is it that's missing? Where is there no shared understanding that will allow the parties to progress? And if you can have a tailored, narrow joint session on just that little wedge of the situation, the keystone that's really keeping the parties apart, it can be very productive. And a lot of lawyers are willing to do that if the mediator has the gravitas to say that I'm not going to let this get carried away. If you think that emotions are getting carried away or that this is spinning out of control, just look at me and make a funny face and I'll do something. I'll separate the parties or whatever. But you have that kind of a narrow, tailored, focused joint session. Then you can have a caucus after that that so many times does the trick without having to hit anybody between the eyes with a 2x4. Can be simply, Ellen, we were in that joint session and you were talking about the benefit of the bargain measure of damages, and Steve Bierman was talking about the out-of-pocket measure of damages, and Steve said Hadley versus Baxendale applied this way, and it sounded pretty logical when he said it. What do you think about that? And through that kind of dialogue between a mediator and a lawyer in the presence of the client, set up by that kind of narrow, tailored, focused joint session, the clients, if they're paying attention and are reasonably intelligent, which almost always is the case, they start to draw their own conclusions from the dialogue. And they will start to think for themselves, maybe this is really not such a lead pipe cinch. I saw that other lawyer in action. I heard the other client speak and air some of their concerns. Oh man, I'm really going to have to sit through 12 days of trial in a courtroom away from my business, and I'm going to have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars or maybe more for the opportunity to play all 7 cards in this hand. Wait a second, you know? And that sometimes is why we have these long doldrums of time in mediations in the late morning and early afternoon. That's when clients are starting to think to themselves, maybe my lawyer is right. Maybe what he or she's been telling me all of these past several weeks is right. Maybe I ought to consider some different settlement options. And it's a slow process. When you realize, though, that these clients have been sitting comfortably with their previously unshakable beliefs for months or years, the miracle is the surprise is not that so few cases settle on the first day of mediation. The miracle is that anything settles on the first day of mediation. Because what we're doing is we're trying to help people turn around attitudes that have been ensconced for months or years. And if we can do that in 8 or 10 or 12 hours, man, that is fantastic.
So you're an
And
advocate for
maybe this can
this.
also
Go ahead.
for joint sessions. Not in every case, right? There are some cases where if you put people in the same room with each other, Ellen, it would be like the proverbial dropping 2 cats into a mailbox. They would just tear each other to shreds, along with everything else that's in there. You have to make the decision in the moment. Is it okay to put these people in the same room? My sense, though, is that too many mediators who have not mastered the craft have simply given up on the joint session altogether. And I can tell you from previous episodes of this webinar, we have had on some of the most sophisticated general counsel in the country. We have had on some of the most highly regarded litigators in the country. And when you get up to these super A-list levels of sophistication, they want joint sessions. They want to talk to each other. They want to maintain control over the process. They're smart and they're sophisticated. And even in the kinds of situations in clinics where you're discussing, Alan, the people in the neighborhood clinic, they may not have the sophistication to negotiate an antitrust case, but they have the sophistication to deal with the matters that are in their own life. And if you're talking about um, neighbors who make too much noise, and if you're talking about adjacent businesses and who gets the parking spaces and things that are people are generally able to deal competently with the subject matter of their own lives if we trust them to do that and if we facilitate the process correctly. Is that an ambitious goal for mediation? Maybe. I think when we started in this, as long ago, in the 1990s, as we did, Ellen, that's why we got into this. And I think that that dream, that ambition it's not utopian. I think it's possible. I think it's appropriate. And I think we should work as hard as we can to realize that.
Well, Jeff, let me sort of follow up on that because I do think that sort of rethinking the value of the joint session is a natural consequence of this opinion. I remember back when I was working on the mediation ethics book that I edited, there's one chapter entitled When There's Lies in the Room, What Happens When One Party is Lying and the mediator knows it? And the party wants the mediator to convey the lie. And Dwight Golan was one of the commentators. I think everyone knows Dwight and knows how thoughtful he is. And another commentator was a transformative mediator from Boston. And Dwight went through a sort of complex analysis and he ultimately concluded, no, I'm not carrying that dirty water. And here's what I would do, and here's what I would say in the caucus. And the transformative mediator just said, this is never going to come up because I do my mediations in joint session. So I'm never in a position where I'm being asked to carry one misleading statement to the other side. So I was having a conversation last night with a New York mediator who was hopping mad about this opinion, hopping mad because she felt like lawyers who don't know anything about mediation are telling mediators how to practice. And she was sort of saying, what do I do when one party says to me, how about we don't pay out the amount of cash they're asking for, but for example, we have a non-monetary benefit. We'll license some software. Um, you know, convey that to the other side, but I don't want them to think it comes from me. I need them to think this is your idea, Mr. Mediator. Well, now the mediator can't engage in that little deception. So they've just tied my hand behind my back. Because reactive devaluation is real. These are mediator practices that are harmless, but they help get the deal done. And my response was, well, why don't you just bring them together and say you make the offer. It's a great offer. I mean, we had more conversation about that. But I do think that this opinion pushes toward more conversations in joint session. I had a thought when I was reading Rule 4.1 for the 17,000th time that maybe we as a field should start thinking about what those mediator conventions are. Those little harmless deceptions that mediators still want to engage in because they deal with reactive devaluation, and ask, should we be talking about those practices and thinking deeply, are they harmless or, are there problems with those practices. If you look at some of the academic literature, it talks about mediation as a place where there is an exchange of imperfect information. And by imperfect information, we mean not entirely 100% truthful. There is spin. And what I like about this opinion is we're examining the spin. And we should be. We should be talking
Yeah,
about this.
so Ellen, there's 100 ways to deal with the kind of situation that you described, and everybody on the line's probably got some ideas. I would start out, Max Bazerman, our friend Max Bazerman, who's been a guest on the webinar. He's written extensively about the concept of ethical shading. You know, once you do, maybe Larry Summers is falling into this trap. You cross the line a little bit, then, oh, I crossed the line a little bit, nothing happened. I crossed a little bit more, nothing happened. A little bit, nothing happened. All of a sudden, you're a scoundrel. So let me ask you this. So what if the mediator goes into the room with the other party and asks a question? Would it interest you to inject the element of a licensing agreement for the software, whatever it is, into this negotiation? Well, you can ask a question like that. They might say, did the other side put you up to that? I say, look,
Doesn't
it's
matter. Yeah.
just a question. If you're in, if it would help, it would help. If not, not. I also, and I want to get to Dean Alfini in just a minute. His views are always so worthwhile. I also will sometimes push back against the party who wants me to do something ridiculous and say, look, if I do that, it really is not in your interest for me to do that. Because if I go in and say something ridiculous to the other side, I will lose credibility in that room if I try to utter those words with a straight face. And I will lose effectiveness in trying to help you with them for the whole rest of the day. So let's not be penny wise and pound foolish here. And sometimes I will say to somebody, look, if you think it's such a great idea, you tell them, does the
Right.
transformative, oh no, I don't want to do that. Say, well, if you're embarrassed to do it, why should I do it? Let's find something that is actually reasonable, as you know,
Right.
engender some cooperation
Right.
and
And I
perhaps a
love
joint session.
questions. Yeah.
Questions. I
Jim,
tell you, Alan, I had the great blessing of going to Harvard Law School in a day when the Socratic dialogue was the key. And I can't go without mentioning my first year contracts professor, Phil Arita, greatest professor I ever had, master of the Socratic method. I feel like I'm channeling him all the time. Jim Alfini, please, briefly.
Um, Ellen and Jeff, terrific analyses. Thank you. This is really helpful. Just a point that you guys probably don't know, the ABA Center for Ethics and Professional Responsibility that drafted this opinion, to my knowledge, did not reach out or collaborate in any way with our section. We have an executive committee meeting tomorrow, and I'm going to confirm that. And if that's the case, I'm going to try in some way to pass on Ellen's comments because I think they're very well taken. If they had had an Ellen Waldman sitting in with them, they might have avoided some of the ambiguity that they have in there now. But at any rate, I on the other side of that is I am impressed that they did as good a job as they did overall. But they would have done better if they had had one of us in there to chat with them as they were doing it.
Well, who can argue with the concept of more collaboration? Jim, this webinar is recorded and we'll send you a copy, and please furnish it to anybody who you think would benefit from the discussion.
Great.
The clock on the wall says the time is up. We could go on, and indeed, Ellen and I had the treat of going on with each other for several hours over the past
we
couple of
did.
weeks. I learned a lot from it, Ellen, and I really want to thank you for just doing a tremendous job stimulating everybody's thinking on this very important topic. The more thoughtful we become as mediators, the more ethical we become, the more practical we become, the more effective we become, the more helpful we become to everybody. And Ellen, you've done a great job in in fostering all of that. Thank you. Please contribute to the Westchester Food Bank or any other food bank that's important to you. Food insecurity is nationwide and indeed worldwide. Please contribute to a food bank in honor of Ellen Waldman. Let us know about your contribution so that we can add it to our running total and make Ellen the answer to that bar trivia question that'll last for decades. Who put the Will Work for Food program project over $900,000? Thank you all. This has been a terrific hour. Ellen Waldman, you're fantastic. And with that, we are complete.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Thanks everyone for coming.